A journey interrupted. Serena Monroe was accustomed to challenges. As one of the wealthiest self-made black women in the world, she had transformed an idea sketched on a napkin into a global conglomerate worth billions. Her reputation extended beyond her business acumen. Serena was a philanthropist who championed underserved communities, empowering countless women and minorities through education initiatives and small business grants. She believed that wealth was a tool, one that carried the responsibility to create change. Today, however, her focus wasn't on balance sheets or social programs. Serena was traveling to deliver the keynote speech at a highly anticipated international business summit in New York. Her topic, redefining success. Wealth with purpose, was close to her heart. She hoped her words would inspire leaders to think beyond profits and use their influence to make the world better. The calm before the flight. Dressed in an elegantly tailored cream suit and a pearl necklace, Serena moved with quiet confidence through the bustling airport. She maintained a low profile, offering polite smiles to the staff who recognized her. Serena's assistant, Julia, had arranged a smooth check-in process, and within minutes, Serena was seated in the first-class lounge, sipping tea as she reviewed her notes. Even in her moments of calm, Serena radiated a presence that couldn't be ignored. She was the type of person who made heads turn without trying. Yet, she never sought the spotlight. Her humility and grace were as much her trademarks as her business empire. After a brief announcement, Serena boarded the plane. She settled into her first-class seat, grateful for the quiet reprieve. The flight attendant in her section, a young woman named Claire, greeted her with a perfunctory nod. Serena didn't mind the lack of warmth. She assumed Claire was simply having a long day. Still, she offered a kind thank you when Claire handed her a glass of water. The flight attendant didn't respond. Serena opened her laptop, intending to refine her speech. The hum of the engines provided a comforting backdrop as the plane ascended into the clouds. An uneasy dynamic. It wasn't long before Serena noticed an odd tension. Claire's demeanor grew increasingly dismissive as the flight progressed. She avoided eye contact with Serena, spoke to her in clipped tones, and seemed to linger at other passengers' seats while ignoring Serena's requests. When Serena asked for a blanket, Claire returned 15 minutes later with an exasperated sigh and practically tossed it onto her lap. "Thank you," Serena said, determined to maintain her composure. Claire didn't reply. She turned sharply on her heel, her frustration palpable. Serena's initial instinct was to overlook the behavior. Everyone had bad days, she reasoned. But the pattern persisted. During the beverage service, Claire skipped Serena's seat entirely. When Serena gestured to get her attention, Claire acted as though she hadn't seen her. Serena began to feel the weight of the other passengers' gazes. Some were sympathetic, others curious. But no one intervened. Then there was the pilot. Captain Derek Caldwell was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 40s. During his periodic breaks from the cockpit, he would stroll down the aisle, greeting passengers with a forced smile. Each time he passed Serena, his demeanor shifted. His smile faded, replaced by a look that could only be described as contemptuous. Once, Serena overheard him whisper something to Claire. The two exchanged a glance, followed by muffled laughter. A flashpoint. As the meal service began, Serena politely asked Claire if her tray could be cleared early. She needed space to work on her laptop and finalize a few last-minute notes for her speech. Claire rolled her eyes so dramatically that even passengers across the aisle noticed. "We'll get to you when we get to you," she snapped. Serena felt a flicker of irritation, but kept her voice calm. "I understand, but I'd appreciate it if you could make an exception. I have some work to do." Claire's expression darkened. Leaning in close, she said in a low, biting tone, "You people always think you're entitled to special treatment." The words struck like a thunderclap. Serena's breath hitched, and the weight of humiliation threatened to crush her composure. The cabin seemed to shrink around her, the murmurs of other passengers blending into a dull roar. Before Serena could respond, Captain Caldwell appeared. His presence seemed to embolden Claire. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. Serena straightened her shoulders. "I was simply asking for my tray to be cleared so I could work. I didn't realize that was an unreasonable request." The captain chuckled, a cold, dismissive sound. "Maybe you should learn some patience," he said, leaning closer. "People like you think you can buy respect, but on this flight, you're just another passenger." Gasps rippled through the cabin. A few passengers exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke up. Serena felt the sting of their silence as much as the captain's words. The breaking point. The moment escalated when Claire, in an apparent fit of frustration, slapped Serena's tray. The plate of half-eaten food tumbled into Serena's lap, leaving a mess of sauce and crumbs on her pristine suit. Serena froze, her hands trembling as she reached for a napkin. "Clean yourself up," Claire sneered. The tension in the cabin reached a fever pitch. Passengers whispered among themselves, some recording the incident on their phones. Serena felt their stares burning into her, but she refused to let shame take root. Taking a deep breath, she locked eyes with Captain Caldwell. "This behavior is unacceptable," she said, her voice steady but firm. "I will not tolerate being treated this way." The captain smirked. "If you don't calm down, I'll have you removed from this flight." Serena's jaw tightened. She had faced adversity before: boardroom battles, systemic biases, and even threats against her business. But this was different. This was a direct, personal attack, one that sought to undermine her dignity and humanity. An unexpected ally. Unbeknownst to the crew, one passenger had been filming the entire exchange. Alan Grant, a journalist traveling to cover the same business summit as Serena, had witnessed the unfolding drama with growing outrage. He admired Serena's work and had even planned to attend her keynote speech. When Captain Caldwell shoved Serena's shoulder, a physical gesture meant to intimidate, Alan stood up. "That's enough," he said, his voice breaking through the tense silence. "I've recorded everything, and I won't hesitate to report this to the authorities." The cabin erupted into a mix of murmurs and gasps. Claire and Captain Caldwell froze, their expressions a mixture of shock and fear. The other passengers, emboldened by Alan's defiance, began voicing their support. "This is unacceptable," one woman exclaimed. "She didn't do anything wrong," another added. Serena looked at Alan, gratitude and resolve mingling in her eyes. For the first time during the ordeal, she felt a spark of hope. The flight crew scrambled to defuse the situation, but the damage was done. Alan's video, already uploaded to social media, was beginning to gain traction. The story was far from over. For Serena, this was no longer just about her. It was about the systemic issues that allowed such behavior to persist, and the fight to dismantle them. Rising storm. Serena's silence as the plane landed was deliberate, not a mark of defeat, but a calculated pause. Words spoken in anger often lost their potency. She would not be reduced to a figure of rage. She had learned long ago that her greatest weapon against injustice was her composure, a controlled, searing clarity that turned anger into action. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, Serena glanced at Alan, the journalist who had taken a stand. His presence was a lifeline, a witness who had seen the truth and refused to let it be buried. Alan gave her a reassuring nod, his phone still in his hand, ready to capture any further mistreatment. When the seatbelt sign flicked off, passengers began to rise, their movements a mix of curiosity and nervous energy. Serena stood as well, carefully gathering her belongings. Her cream suit was irreparably stained, but her dignity remained intact. She carried herself as she always did, with an unshakable grace that made it impossible to ignore her presence. Confrontation at the gate. As Serena exited the plane, she was greeted by a uniformed customer service representative from the airline, summoned by the flight crew. The woman, visibly flustered, approached Serena hesitantly. Her name tag read Linda. "Ms. Monroe," Linda began, her tone a mix of apology and trepidation. I've been informed of an incident during your flight. Please allow me to escort you to a private lounge where we can discuss this matter." Serena held Linda's gaze, her expression unreadable. "There's no need for a private discussion," she replied evenly. "This was a public incident, and it will be addressed publicly." Linda's face paled, but before she could respond, Alan stepped forward, his phone held up. "She's right. This was witnessed by dozens of passengers and recorded. Any attempt to sweep this under the rug will only worsen the situation for your airline." Other passengers began to gather near the gate, murmuring their agreement. A middle-aged man stepped forward, holding his phone. "I recorded it too," he said. "The way she was treated was unacceptable." The growing crowd forced Linda to retreat slightly. She gestured toward the airport security team standing nearby, as if silently pleading for help. But the officers didn't intervene. They seemed to recognize the gravity of the situation and remained on the sidelines, observing. "I'll be filing a formal complaint," Serena continued, her voice calm but resolute. "And I expect a transparent investigation, not a superficial apology." The power of social media. By the time Serena arrived at her hotel in Manhattan, the storm had already begun to brew online. Alan's video, uploaded shortly after the plane landed, had gone viral. With a caption that read, "Black billionaire Serena Monroe humiliated and physically intimidated on a flight. Here's what systemic racism looks like in 2024. It struck a nerve with millions." The video showed every agonizing detail: Claire's dismissive tone, Captain Caldwell's sneering comments, the physical shove. It ended with Alan's defiant stand and the murmurs of support from fellow passengers. Within hours, hashtags like #JusticeForSerena, #EndEairLineracism, and #DignityInFlight were trending worldwide. The comments section was a mix of outrage, support, and personal stories of similar experiences. This happens every day to people without Serena's platform. Enough is enough. How do these people even have jobs? The airline needs to be held accountable. Serena handled this with more grace than I ever could. Respect to her. Serena's assistant, Julia, greeted her at the hotel with a laptop in hand. The videos hit 3 million views, and the media's already picking it up, Julia reported. CNN, BBC, and even international outlets are reaching out for interviews. Serena sank into the plush armchair in her suite, exhaustion creeping in, but her resolve remained intact. "This isn't about interviews," she said, her voice firm. "This is about change. A call to action." Serena spent the next several hours in a conference call with her legal team, strategizing her response. She didn't want a simple apology from the airline. She wanted systemic reform. By the time the call ended, a plan was in place. The following morning, Serena addressed the public for the first time since the incident. A press conference had been arranged in one of the hotel's grand ballrooms. The space was packed with journalists, activists, and supporters. Cameras flashed as Serena took the podium, flanked by Julia and Alan. She began her statement with a calm yet powerful tone. "Yesterday, I was subjected to blatant discrimination and physical intimidation during a flight. This was not an isolated incident, but a symptom of a larger issue, one that affects countless people every day. Today, I am using my voice to say, enough." The room fell silent as Serena outlined her demands. Mandatory diversity and sensitivity training for airline employees, a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior, and an independent audit of the airline's complaint handling processes. "I will not accept empty promises or token gestures," Serena declared. "This is about creating real, lasting change, not just for me, but for everyone who has been silenced or ignored." The airline's response. By noon, the airline had issued its first official statement. It was a poorly worded attempt to mitigate the damage, promising an internal investigation and apologizing for any inconvenience caused. Social media erupted in response, calling out the vagueness and insincerity of the statement. "This is not an inconvenience," one Twitter user wrote. "It's systemic racism, plain and simple." As pressure mounted, the airline's CEO, Charles Hunt, scheduled a live press conference. With a carefully rehearsed apology, he announced that Claire and Captain Caldwell had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. He also extended an invitation to Serena to collaborate on improving the airline's policies. Serena watched the broadcast from her hotel room, her expression neutral. "He's only saying this because the backlash is hurting their bottom line," she said to Julia. Ellen, who was also present, nodded. "True, but this is your leverage. The public's on your side, and they're scared. Use it." Building a movement. The incident quickly became a national conversation, sparking debates about racial discrimination, privilege, and corporate accountability. Serena's name was on every news channel, not just as a victim, but as a leader pushing for systemic reform. Her poise and clarity in the face of adversity inspired a wave of activism. Serena seized the momentum by launching a new initiative called Altitude for All, aimed at fostering inclusivity and accountability in the airline industry. The initiative partnered with advocacy groups, legal organizations, and training experts to implement real changes. Donations poured in from individuals and corporations alike. Social media campaigns encouraged people to share their own experiences of discrimination in travel, creating a groundswell of stories that underscored the urgency of the issue. A private reflection. Late that evening, after a whirlwind day of press, meetings, and calls, Serena finally had a moment to herself. Sitting by the window of her suite, she gazed at the glittering New York skyline. The weight of the day pressed down on her, but so did a sense of purpose. Her phone buzzed with a message from Alan. "The world's watching. Let's make this count." Serena smiled faintly, her determination renewed. This fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but she was ready for the battles ahead. For Serena Monroe, this was more than a personal victory. It was the beginning of a movement. Catalyst for change. The following morning, the city buzzed with news of Serena Monroe's stand against discrimination. The media frenzy surrounding her ordeal had reached an unprecedented scale. Breakfast talk shows dissected the incident, late-night hosts delivered biting monologues, and social media was a continuous cascade of hashtags, reposts, and opinion pieces. Serena had become more than a billionaire. She was now the face of a growing movement. But Serena wasn't interested in fame. She was interested in action. As she sat in her hotel suite, sipping coffee and reviewing her schedule for the day, her assistant, Julia, rattled off updates. "The video's at 12 million views," Julia said, scrolling through her tablet. "The airline's stock has dropped by 5% overnight. And Charles Hunt, the CEO, has requested a private meeting." Serena arched an eyebrow. "He's desperate," she said, setting her cup down. "They're not trying to solve the problem. They're trying to protect their brand." Julia nodded. "Agreed. But the question is, do we meet with him?" Serena leaned back in her chair, thinking. "We'll meet, but on our terms. I want cameras, a public statement, and a clear commitment to reform. No backroom apologies." The meeting. Later that afternoon, Serena and Julia arrived at a sleek conference room in Midtown Manhattan. The airline's legal team was already seated, along with CEO Charles Hunt. He was a tall, silver-haired man whose polished demeanor seemed slightly frayed under the pressure. Serena's legal counsel, a formidable woman named Alicia Carter, accompanied her. The atmosphere in the room was tense, with the weight of public scrutiny hanging over every word. "Ms. Monroe," Hunt began, extending a hand. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with us." Serena shook his hand briefly, her expression calm but unyielding. "Let's get to the point, Mr. Hunt. What actions are you prepared to take to address what happened and prevent it from happening again?" Hunt cleared his throat, visibly uneasy. "First, let me offer my sincerest apologies for the incident. It does not reflect the values of our airline, and we are committed to making this right." Serena held his gaze. "Apologies are a start, but they don't address the root cause. I need to see real, actionable changes. Hunt nodded, motioning to his team. We've drafted a plan to implement mandatory diversity training for all employees, establish an independent oversight committee, and update our policies to include a zero-tolerance approach to discrimination. Serena glanced at Alicia, who nodded in approval. But Serena wasn't done. And what about the individuals involved? Claire and Captain Caldwell. What steps are being taken to hold them accountable? Hunt hesitated. They've been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. That's not enough, Serena said, her tone sharp. You're protecting them while putting on a show of accountability. If they're found guilty of misconduct, they need to face real consequences, not just a slap on the wrist. Hunt shifted uncomfortably. We're handling the matter as quickly as we can. Serena folded her arms. I'll hold you to that. And if your investigation isn't transparent, I'll make sure the world knows. Mobilizing a movement. That evening, Serena addressed her growing base of supporters through a live stream. Seated in a simple chair against a neutral backdrop, she spoke directly to the camera with a mixture of passion and resolve. This fight isn't just about me, she began. It's about every person who has been overlooked, dismissed, or mistreated because of the color of their skin, their gender, or their background. It's about demanding better, from corporations, from institutions, and from ourselves. She announced the launch of Altitude for All, an initiative focused on creating inclusivity and accountability in the airline and travel industries. The program would provide resources for victims of discrimination, push for legislative reforms, and partner with advocacy groups to ensure lasting change. I can't do this alone, Serena said, her voice steady. But together, we can build a future where no one has to endure what I endured. This is more than a movement. This is a reckoning. Her words resonated deeply, and within hours, donations began pouring into the initiative. Prominent activists, celebrities, and business leaders pledged their support, amplifying her message across the globe. The backlash. As the movement gained momentum, it also drew criticism. Some accused Serena of seeking attention or using the incident for personal gain. Others dismissed her claims, arguing that her wealth insulated her from real discrimination. Serena refused to let the negativity deter her. Instead, she addressed it head-on during an interview with a major news network. People assume that wealth and success make you immune to bias, she said. But racism doesn't care about your bank account. It's insidious, and it exists at every level of society. My story is just one example of a much larger problem. The interviewer leaned forward. How do you respond to those who say this is just a publicity stunt? Serena smiled faintly. Publicity isn't my goal. Change is. And if shining a light on these issues makes some people uncomfortable, then I'm doing something right. Allies and advocates. As Serena's initiative gained traction, she began to forge powerful alliances. Alan Grant, the journalist who had stood up for her on the flight, became a key partner in her efforts. His coverage of the incident and the broader issue of systemic discrimination brought additional credibility to the movement. You gave me the courage to speak up, Alan admitted during a strategy meeting. Watching you handle that situation with such grace, it inspired me. Serena placed a hand on his shoulder. Courage is contagious. You gave me strength too. Other allies included influential civil rights organizations, legal experts, and even airline employees who wanted to see change within their industry. Together, they organized a series of town halls, public forums, and workshops to discuss solutions and gather support. A global impact. Within weeks, Altitude for All had become a global phenomenon. Airlines in several countries began implementing similar reforms, and lawmakers introduced new regulations to address discrimination in the travel industry. Serena's keynote speech at the Business Summit, now reframed as a rallying cry for justice, drew a record audience and sparked discussions far beyond the corporate world. But Serena knew the fight was far from over. Real change required persistence, and she was prepared for the long road ahead. As she stood on the summit stage, her voice unwavering. She delivered a message that encapsulated her journey. We are more than the sum of our struggles. We are the architects of a better tomorrow. And no matter how high the barriers, we will rise. The applause that followed was deafening. But for Serena, it wasn't the applause that mattered. It was the collective energy of a movement that refused to be silenced. Turning the tide. As Serena Monroe's story gained international attention, the impact of her actions rippled across industries and borders. Her calm but resolute demeanor had turned a moment of personal injustice into a rallying cry for change, and the world was taking notice. Yet for all the progress Serena had inspired, the road ahead was fraught with challenges, and the opposition she faced was about to intensify. A global movement. Serena's initiative, Altitude for All, had already begun to yield tangible results. Major airlines across North America and Europe announced sweeping reforms, from mandatory sensitivity training to the creation of independent oversight committees to address passenger complaints. Advocacy groups praised these measures, hailing them as a step toward greater accountability. Corporate sponsors, eager to align with the growing movement, offered generous donations to support Altitude for All's programs. Serena, however, was selective in accepting funding. She turned down offers from corporations with questionable track records, unwilling to allow her cause to be co-opted by empty gestures. This isn't about optics, she told her team during a strategy meeting. It's about real, lasting change. We're not here to give anyone a free pass. As the initiative expanded, Serena and her team launched a series of public forums in major cities. These events provided a platform for individuals to share their stories of discrimination in travel and propose solutions. Serena attended each forum personally, listening intently to every speaker and offering words of encouragement. One speaker, a young black woman named Hasha, shared her harrowing experience of being racially profiled by airport security. Her voice trembled as she recounted the humiliation of being singled out in front of her peers. When she finished, Serena approached her and said, "Your courage to speak up is powerful. Together, we'll make sure your story leads to change." Backlash and resistance. As the movement gained traction, it also faced backlash from those resistant to change. Anonymous online trolls flooded Serena's social media accounts with hateful comments, accusing her of being divisive and playing the race card. Conservative pundits criticized her efforts, claiming they were an overreaction to a single incident. The airline at the center of the controversy, despite its public statements of remorse, began quietly lobbying against some of the proposed regulatory reforms. Leaked emails revealed that executives were concerned about the cost of implementing new policies and feared losing their competitive edge. The pushback extended beyond words. Serena received anonymous threats via email and mail, warning her to stay in her lane. While her team heightened security measures, Serena refused to be intimidated. She spoke about the threats during a televised interview, saying, "Fear is a weapon used to silence change. But I won't be silenced, and neither will the people who stand with me." The turning point. The airline's resistance came to a head during a high-profile congressional hearing on discrimination in the travel industry. Serena was invited to testify before a panel of lawmakers, alongside other victims, industry experts, and corporate representatives. The hearing was broadcast live, drawing millions of viewers. Seated at the witness table, Serena radiated composure. When it was her turn to speak, she began by recounting her experience on the flight, describing it not as an isolated incident, but as a reflection of systemic issues. "This isn't just about one flight," she said. "It's about a culture that allows bias to go unchecked, that prioritizes profits over people. And it's not just about me. It's about every person who has been mistreated, ignored, or silenced." As Serena spoke, the CEO of the airline sat stone-faced across the room. When it was his turn to address the panel, he attempted to deflect blame, suggesting that the incident was an anomaly caused by a few bad apples. Serena responded sharply, "Systemic problems aren't solved by scapegoating individuals. They're solved by acknowledging the culture that allows these behaviors to persist and committing to meaningful change. Her words resonated deeply, sparking applause from the audience and even some members of the panel. The hearing ended with lawmakers pledging to introduce legislation aimed at combating discrimination in the travel industry. A personal cost. Despite her public triumphs, the relentless pace of the movement began to take a toll on Serena personally. Late nights, constant travel, and the emotional weight of the stories she heard left her feeling drained. She confided in Julia one evening, saying, "I feel like I'm carrying the weight of the world. Some days, I wonder if I'm strong enough." Julia, ever supportive, reminded her, "You don't have to carry it alone. Look at what you've already accomplished. You've inspired millions. Let them help you carry this." It was a reminder Serena needed. She began delegating more responsibilities to her team and prioritizing moments of self-care, knowing that sustaining the movement required sustaining herself. The power of unity. A few weeks later, Serena attended a massive rally in Washington, D.C., organized by Altitude for All and its partner organizations. The event drew tens of thousands of attendees, including activists, community leaders, and everyday people inspired by Serena's story. As Serena took the stage, she was greeted by a sea of faces, their energy palpable. Holding the microphone, she looked out at the crowd and said, "This movement is bigger than me, bigger than any one person. It's a collective demand for dignity, respect, and justice. And together, we're unstoppable." Her speech was met with thunderous applause, chants of "Justice now" echoing through the crowd. It was a moment of triumph, a reminder of the power of unity in the face of adversity. A glimmer of hope. In the weeks that followed, Serena's efforts continued to bear fruit. Airlines began voluntarily adopting the reforms championed by Altitude for All, fearing public backlash if they didn't. The legislation introduced in Congress gained bipartisan support, signaling a shift in the political landscape. Serena's initiative also expanded its scope, addressing discrimination in other sectors of the travel industry, from hotels to ride-sharing platforms. The stories shared during the public forums became the foundation for a comprehensive report, which was widely circulated among policymakers and industry leaders. Through it all, Serena remained steadfast in her mission. She knew the fight was far from over, but for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope, a belief that lasting change was not only possible but within reach. Shattering the glass ceiling, Serena Monroe stood at the helm of a movement that had grown beyond anything she could have imagined. What had begun as a harrowing personal experience aboard a flight had transformed into a global reckoning with systemic discrimination. Yet, as she reflected on the journey thus far, she knew that the movement's success was only as strong as its ability to inspire others to take action. The corporate reckoning. The airline at the center of the controversy, after weeks of public outcry and relentless pressure, faced mounting financial and reputational losses. Their CEO, Charles Hunt, announced his resignation, citing the need for fresh leadership to restore public trust. It was a hollow gesture, one Serena saw through immediately. "This isn't about replacing one face at the top," she said during a televised interview. "It's about changing the system from the ground up." Under new leadership, the airline pledged sweeping reforms, including the implementation of Serena's proposed policies. They agreed to partner with Altitude for All to establish a transparent system for handling complaints and enforcing accountability. Serena's legal team worked tirelessly to ensure the agreement was airtight. When the news broke, Serena addressed the public with measured optimism. "This is a step in the right direction," she said, "but it's just the beginning. We will hold them, and every corporation, accountable to their promises." Amplifying voices. With the airline's reforms underway, Serena shifted her focus to the broader scope of Altitude for All. The initiative launched a digital platform where travelers could share their experiences of discrimination and connect with legal and advocacy resources. The platform, aptly named Clear Skies, quickly gained traction, with thousands of users submitting their stories within weeks. One story that particularly moved Serena came from a single mother named Linda Johnson. Linda, an African-American woman, described being forced off a flight with her 2 children after a misunderstanding over their seating arrangement. The humiliation she faced left her children in tears and shattered their trust in air travel. Serena personally reached out to Linda, inviting her to share her story at a town hall in Atlanta. "Your voice matters," Serena told her, "and your story can inspire others to stand up for what's right." Linda's story went viral after the town hall, sparking widespread outrage and leading to policy changes at the airline involved. "I never thought anyone would listen," Linda tearfully told Serena after the event. "You've given me hope." The legal fight. Behind the scenes, Serena's legal team worked to push legislation that would codify many of the reforms she championed. The proposed Fair Skies Act included provisions for mandatory bias training, a federal oversight body to handle complaints, and hefty fines for airlines found guilty of discriminatory practices. The bill faced fierce opposition from powerful airline lobbyists who argued that the measures were costly and unnecessary. But Serena wasn't deterred. She met with lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, sharing data, personal stories, and the overwhelming public support for the bill. One particularly contentious meeting with a senior senator nearly derailed the bill. The senator, a staunch advocate for deregulation, dismissed the proposal as an overreach. Serena, unfazed, countered with a calm but pointed rebuttal. "Overreach?" she said. "Ensuring basic human dignity isn't overreach, it's the bare minimum. And if the airlines won't hold themselves accountable, then the law must step in." Her words struck a chord. The senator, though not entirely convinced, agreed to review the proposal further. It was a small victory, but Serena knew that progress was often won inch by inch. Personal trials. While Serena's professional triumphs mounted, her personal life faced its own challenges. The relentless pace of her advocacy work left little time for herself. She missed birthdays, family gatherings, and moments of quiet reflection. Her mother, a retired schoolteacher, voiced her concern during a rare phone call. "Serena, you've done so much already," her mother said gently. "But you're only human. Don't forget to take care of yourself." "I can't stop now, Mom," Serena replied. "There's too much at stake." Her mother sighed. "I know. But remember, even the strongest foundations can crack if they aren't cared for." The conversation lingered in Serena's mind. That evening, she took a rare moment of respite, sitting on the balcony of her hotel room and gazing at the city lights. She allowed herself to feel the weight of her exhaustion and the depth of her responsibility. But as the cool night air filled her lungs, she also felt a renewed sense of purpose. A global summit. As Altitude for All continued to gain momentum, Serena was invited to deliver the opening address at the United Nations Global Human Rights Summit. The invitation was both an honor and a testament to the movement's impact. The summit, held in Geneva, brought together leaders from around the world to discuss pressing issues of equity and inclusion. Serena's speech was the most anticipated event of the conference. She stood before a packed auditorium, her presence commanding yet approachable. "Discrimination is not a regional issue," she began. "It is a global one. It transcends borders, industries, and institutions. And while we cannot erase centuries of injustice overnight, we can build a future where equity is not an aspiration but a reality." She highlighted the stories of individuals like Linda Johnson, emphasizing that systemic change began with recognizing the humanity of every person. Her words were met with a standing ovation, and several world leaders pledged to implement similar reforms in their own countries. A legacy in the making. The summit marked a turning point in Serena's journey. Her work had evolved from addressing a singular incident to reshaping the travel industry and inspiring broader conversations about equity. Yet, she remained humble, often redirecting praise to the countless individuals who had shared their stories and joined the fight. In the months that followed, the Fair Skies Act passed with bipartisan support, a landmark victory for the movement. Airlines that once resisted reform now scrambled to adopt best practices, fearing public backlash and regulatory penalties. Serena knew the fight wasn't over, but for the first time, she felt the tide truly turning. The glass ceiling she had spent her life shattering was now giving way to a clearer, more equitable sky. As she boarded a flight to her next destination, this time greeted with respect and care, Serena reflected on how far the movement had come. She wasn't just a passenger on this journey. She was its captain, steering the course toward a future where dignity wasn't a privilege but a right. The winds of change. The journey Serena Monroe embarked on had transformed her into more than a figurehead for justice. She had become a symbol of hope for countless individuals. The success of her initiatives and the passage of the Fair Skies Act were historic milestones, but Serena knew they were only the foundation for broader societal change. She often reminded herself and her team, legislation is a start, but culture is the finish line, an unlikely ally. As Serena's movement grew, she received an unexpected message from Claire Davis, the flight attendant who had mistreated her on that fateful flight. The email was brief but apologetic. Ms. Monroe, I've spent months reflecting on my actions. I realize now how deeply I failed. Not just you but myself. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to learn and do better. If you'll let me, I'd like to be part of the change you're creating. Serena stared at the screen, conflicted. Claire's actions had been abhorrent, but Serena had always believed in the power of redemption. After consulting with her team, she decided to meet Claire face to face. They met in a small cafe in Chicago, far from the media's gaze. Claire looked visibly nervous, her hands trembling as she stirred her coffee. I don't expect you to trust me, Claire began, her voice shaky. But I want to understand how I can help dismantle the system I was a part of. Serena listened intently, her expression unreadable. When Claire finished, Serena leaned forward and said, acknowledging your role is the first step. The second step is committing to education and action. If you're serious, I'll give you a chance. Claire was stunned. You would trust me after everything I did. Serena's gaze softened. This isn't about trust. It's about the work. Prove through your actions that you've changed. Claire became an active participant in Altitude for All, sharing her story during training sessions to highlight the dangers of implicit bias and the importance of accountability. Her vulnerability resonated with many, adding a layer of complexity to the movement. A transformational partnership. In the months following the passage of the Fair Skies Act, Serena focused on building partnerships across industries. She approached leaders in hospitality, ride-sharing, and even tech, urging them to adopt similar reforms. Her conversations were not always easy, as many executives bristled at the idea of overhauling their policies. One such meeting, with the CEO of a major ride-sharing platform, turned into a pivotal moment. The CEO, a young tech mogul named Ethan Price, initially dismissed Serena's concerns, arguing that his company already had measures in place to address discrimination. Your measures are reactionary, Serena countered, her tone calm but firm. They don't address the root causes. Bias training, clear reporting systems, and community oversight aren't optional. They're essential. Ethan stared at her, visibly annoyed. You make it sound like my company is the problem. It's not just your company, Serena replied. It's the system we all operate in. You have the power to set a precedent. Why wouldn't you want to lead by example? Her words seemed to pierce his defensiveness. Over the next few weeks, Ethan worked closely with Serena's team to design a comprehensive equity plan for his platform. Their collaboration became a blueprint for other companies, further solidifying Serena's influence. A moment of reflection. As Serena's advocacy work reached new heights, she finally allowed herself a moment to reflect on her journey. She returned to her hometown in Louisiana, where her mother still lived in the modest house where Serena had grown up. Sitting on the porch one evening, her mother handed her a weathered scrapbook filled with clippings from Serena's early career. You've come a long way, baby, her mother said, pride shining in her eyes. Serena flipped through the pages, seeing photos of herself at community events, her first office, and early articles celebrating her achievements. But the last page stopped her cold. It was a clipping from her high school yearbook. Under her senior photo was her dream: to make the world a better place. Tears welled in her eyes. "I never thought it would be this hard," Serena admitted. Her mother placed a hand on hers. "The hard things are the ones that matter most. And look at you, you're doing exactly what you said you would." A global ripple effect. Serena's work began inspiring similar movements worldwide. Activists in Europe, Asia, and Africa launched initiatives to address discrimination in their own countries, often citing Altitude for All as their inspiration. Serena received invitations to speak at international forums, where her insights were met with standing ovations. One such event, held in Nairobi, left a profound impact on her. A young woman named Amina approached her after the conference, holding a handwritten letter. "Ms. Monroe," Amina said, her voice trembling, "because of you, I had the courage to stand up to my employer when I was treated unfairly. I lost my job, but I gained my self-respect. You gave me that." Serena hugged her tightly, realizing that her work had transcended borders. She was no longer just fighting for herself or her country. She was part of a global revolution. The victory and the challenge. By the end of the year, the Altitude for All initiative had fundamentally reshaped the travel industry. Major airlines reported a significant drop in passenger complaints related to discrimination. Ride-sharing platforms adopted bias training as part of their onboarding process. Hotels partnered with advocacy groups to create more inclusive environments. Yet Serena knew the fight was far from over. For every victory, there were new challenges. Critics continued to undermine her work, and progress in some sectors was slower than she had hoped. But she remained undeterred. During her closing remarks at an annual Altitude for All summit, Serena addressed the crowd with her signature blend of passion and pragmatism. "Change is not a straight line," she said. "It's a winding road filled with setbacks and triumphs. But every step forward is a step closer to the world we deserve. And I promise you this, I will keep walking this road with you, no matter how long it takes." A legacy in motion. As the years passed, Serena's movement continued to evolve, touching countless lives and inspiring a new generation of leaders. Her name became synonymous with resilience and justice, her story a testament to the power of turning pain into purpose. And while Serena's journey was far from over, she knew one thing with certainty: she had already made the world a better place. Sustaining the movement. As the years progressed, Serena Monroe's work began to solidify into something greater than a movement. It became a legacy. Her initiatives had catalyzed change, not just in the travel industry, but in industries far beyond it. Corporations, governments, and educational institutions began adopting the frameworks developed by Altitude for All, using them as blueprints to dismantle systemic inequities. However, Serena was acutely aware of a critical truth: movements that start with a singular figure must evolve into collective action to endure. Building the next generation. Serena shifted her focus to empowering the next generation of advocates. She established the Monroe Fellowship for Social Equity, a program designed to fund and mentor young leaders from marginalized communities who were committed to driving systemic change. The fellowship provided resources for activists, community organizers, and innovators to launch their own initiatives. At the program's inaugural event, Serena stood before a room of 200 fellows, bright, driven individuals from around the world, and shared her vision. "This isn't about me," she began. "It's about you. You are the architects of the future. The work you do will shape industries, redefine cultures, and create spaces where everyone can thrive. My role is to support you, to amplify your voices, and to ensure you have the tools you need to succeed." Among the fellows was a young activist named Jamal, who had started a grassroots campaign to combat housing discrimination in Detroit. Jamal approached Serena after the event, his voice filled with awe. "You don't know what this means to me," he said. "You've shown us that it's possible to fight for what's right and win." Serena smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Keep fighting, Jamal. You're the proof that change is possible." A new battlefront. As Serena's movement expanded, new challenges arose. An economic downturn put pressure on companies to cut costs, and diversity initiatives were often among the first to be scaled back. Serena found herself in boardrooms once again, making the case for why equity was not a luxury but a necessity. One particularly contentious meeting with a major airline's board of directors became a turning point. The airline had announced plans to roll back some of its diversity training programs, citing financial constraints. Serena addressed the room with unwavering resolve. "You're not just cutting a program," she said. "You're cutting trust. Every step backward tells your employees and customers that their dignity is expendable. Is that the legacy you want to leave?" Her words carried weight, and the board ultimately reversed its decision. But Serena understood that the battle for progress was never truly over. Each victory required constant vigilance to protect. Global recognition. Serena's tireless efforts earned her global recognition. She received numerous awards, including the Nobel Peace Prize, for her contributions to social equity and justice. But she remained grounded, viewing such accolades not as endpoints but as reminders of the work yet to be done. During her acceptance speech for the Nobel Peace Prize, Serena reflected on the journey that had brought her to that moment. "I am humbled by this honor," she said, "but this prize is not mine alone. It belongs to every person who stood up, spoke out, and refused to accept injustice as the status quo. It belongs to the single mother fighting for her children, the employee demanding fair treatment, the activist who never gave up. This is our shared victory, and it is our shared responsibility to keep going." Her words resonated around the world, inspiring renewed commitment to the causes she championed. A personal evolution. As Serena's professional achievements soared, she also began to reconnect with herself on a personal level. The years of relentless advocacy had taken a toll, and she realized the importance of nurturing her own well-being. She began dedicating time to her passions, traveling to remote parts of the world, exploring art, and reconnecting with her family. Her visits to her mother's home in Louisiana became more frequent, and she cherished the quiet moments spent on the front porch, reminiscing about her journey. One evening, as she watched the sunset with her mother, Serena confided, "For so long, I thought that if I stopped for even a moment, everything I worked for would crumble. But I'm starting to see that movements don't end when one person steps back. They continue because they belong to everyone." Her mother smiled warmly. "That's the beauty of what you've built, Serena. It's bigger than you now." The Summit of Progress. Years later, Altitude for All hosted its largest global summit yet, bringing together leaders, activists, and citizens from over 50 countries. Serena delivered the keynote address, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "We started with one story," she began, "one moment of injustice. And from that, we built a movement. Today, we are proof that change is possible, that dignity is not negotiable, that equity is not an option, it's a right." As she concluded her speech, the audience erupted into applause. But it wasn't the applause that moved her. It was the sight of people from all walks of life standing together, united in their commitment to a better future. The legacy that endures. Serena Monroe's name became etched in history as a symbol of resilience, justice, and progress. But she remained focused on the present, knowing that the work was never truly finished. Her story continued to inspire, her initiatives continued to grow, and her vision for a world rooted in equity and dignity continued to guide generations. And while Serena's journey had started with a single flight, it was clear that her impact would soar far beyond the skies.